What is up, my dudes? Welcome back to another Sportster video. Today we're going to be taking care of the oil on the Sportster. I actually went ahead and took it for a ride anyway. I took it to work the other day because I was so jonesing to ride because the Bandit is down. You can kind of see in the background. The Bandit doesn't have a front tire on right now, and that's because I hit a rock on the freeway and I bent the front rim. Yeah, it was a big rock. I know most of you guys watching probably already know how to do an oil change, but if you've never done an oil change on a Sportster, or if you're somebody who wants to know how to do it, I'm just gonna kind of walk through how to do it. It's a little different than most oil changes. It's not a plug that you take out and you just put it back in and fill it back up. It's a little bit different than that. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm gonna warm up the bike and then we can dump that oil. So after you've got the bike hot, let it sit for about 5 to 10 minutes for the oil to return to the oil tank. Then you're just going to take off this cap, which sometimes can be a little tricky, a little stuck if it's the rubber seal on there will sometimes get pretty caught on there. And you can just use a flashlight and double check and make sure that the oil has returned to the tank. And you just leave that loose on there so it's got some airflow for when we remove the oil drain hose. What's great about Sportsters is just how different they are, I guess, but how easy they are to work on too. So instead of having a drain plug like you would see on most bikes, you have this hose that literally just attaches to the frame by a little hose clamp. So you just undo the hose clamp, pop off this hose from the frame, and oil come out. So going from the hose all the way to the front of the bike, we've got our oil filter. Got a K&N one that's got a nut on the end of it, so it'll be much easier to take off next time. But for this time, I'll just have to use see if I can squeeze my oil filter wrench in there and see if we can get this thing off. So what I usually do is just use a little bit of oil to make a makeshift funnel so that I don't have to clean up a bunch of oil off of my engine. Take our K&N filter, K&N 170, if you guys can see that. So what I'm switching to finally is some synthetic for the Sportster. I'm doing a lot of research on conventional versus synthetic oil, and I got a lot of advice for the Redline. I figured I'd give it a try. We're gonna pour some oil into the filter, make sure we get all the filter element inside wet with oil, and then we'll screw this back on. Making sure to put a little bit of oil on the seal. Very important to make sure that that doesn't seize up against your engine, because these are not fun to get off when they get stuck on there. This oil filter looks so nice and clean and shiny compared to the rest of my dusty, gross engine. It's so bad. It's so hard to pick it up on video, but this thing is pretty gross looking right now. So one final important step before we call this thing good and just start putting oil back into it is that before you put this cap on for good, you have to pour oil into the tank and wait for it to start coming out of the hose. Once it's coming out of the hose, then you put it back onto the little nipple onto the frame, and that's how you make sure that there's going to be no air in your system. You don't want any air in your system. Oil pump scavenging, or whatever it's called, you can look it up. They say to do it in the manual. I like to do things that the manual says so that I prevent any sort of problem. And if you don't have a manual, then what are you doing? Having a manual is one of the great freedoms in life. You can do anything and work on any bike if you have a service manual, that's for sure. That's what Mom's talking about, not stabbing myself. Good to go! So now, we're gonna take our fancy bottle of Redline and we're gonna fill that oil tank. It's got a right amount of oil level. Oil, it's got a right amount of fluids. What's cool about the Harleys is that they got a little dipstick, and I really like that I have a dipstick because this makes it really easy to check your oil level. What I'm gonna do is get the oil tank probably about halfway full. I'm not really gonna measure it, and then I'm gonna start the bike and let it get hot again and then recheck the oil. Last thing you wanna do is fill this all the way up. The level, if you have a dipstick, is supposed to be about halfway up your dipstick. It's got a top and a bottom line. Don't ever fill it all the way to the halfway to the full mark once you're putting the fresh oil in, because after you start up the engine, you're gonna still have some of that old oil. There's always gonna be a little bit in there, and you also have to account for what you put into the filter as well. So I always like to keep it just a little bit low, and then I can add more if I need more. It's a lot harder to take oil out than it is to put some in. So keep that in mind. As long as you got some oil in there, you're not gonna damage the engine or do anything like that. So I'm gonna go ahead and add the rest of this Redline oil. We'll get it started up and we'll double check that oil level. So that is pretty much it. After you take it for a ride, you want to make sure that you get the engine completely up to operating temperature. Then you're going to want to double check your oil level with using that oil dipstick. Make sure that the bike is standing straight up, so that's not on its side stand. That is one important thing to note. Please let me know down below if you have any questions or comments or anything. As always, if you're going to be servicing your own bike, it's really important to have a service manual. You can either download it or pick one up online or stuff like that. It's always good to know all those specs before you start pulling things apart. But for a Sportster, it really doesn't get much easier to do the oil change. I think anybody can do it. So if it's something that you need to do, I hope that this video helped you out. Please leave a like if you like this video. I can't wait to get all the maintenance done on this thing so that we can keep doing more wasteland stuff, because I don't know about you, I really like the front end, but I'm kind of thinking it's time for another facelift. I'm kind of over the whole windscreen thing. I really like the wind in my face. Alright, see you guys next time.